This is Our News, the weekend edition. And on the broadcast tonight, Abaconians share their concerns with government officials 5 months after Hurricane Dorian. Plus, the tourism minister confirms government in talks to buy the Grand Bahama Airport. And then later on, we feature a Bahamian actor living his dream in the Big Apple.
Our News is brought to you by Alive.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Knowles, and thanks so much for joining us. Abaconians looking for answers to their questions at 2 town hall meetings on that island last evening. 5 months after Hurricane Dorian, residents there are still working to rebuild, but they say they could use a bit more help. Kyle Joaquin was on ABACO and has the story.
Do they qualify?
Can they show evidence of doing business?
They have a business license.
Then they're qualified.
With many still using generators to power their homes and businesses, the promise of power generation by Bahamas Power and Light for a March deadline seems pretty far-fetched to people who call ABACO home. During 2 town hall meetings held by the Disaster Reconstruction Authority in ABACO yesterday, one in Marsh Harbor and the other in Treasure Key, residents showed up by the dozens to find out what's next.
To pay the VAT in Nassau.
The road.
Copy that, and they present it to VAT.
The road I'm going down is I'm going to look at the issues that Abaconians are having with lack of supplies being available in ABACO, and if you need to purchase it in New Providence, how we work with that system.
It's been a tough past few months for those residents in Marsh Harbor who have been working to get basic necessities up and running.
We live with generators. It is what it is. It is what it is. We came out of it with life. Where there's life, there's hope, and so it's not so bad.
For folks like businesswoman Jerona Curry, news of the Small Homes Repair Program offering vouchers of up to $10,000 towards repairing damaged homes, as well as grants from the Small Business Development Center, come as welcoming news.
The majority of rental spaces in the Marsh Harbor area have been completely destroyed, and there seems to be no immediate urgency on the part of those renters to get those spaces back up and running. And so my concern is the government taking into consideration maybe allowing us to purchase some property at a very low rate. They have all that property from the illegal communities that were there. That is very good commercial property, and so hopefully they will take that into consideration.
Then it was on to Treasure Key, where there was standing room only in full gospel assembly.
We don't have any idea who the water person is, who telephone. It would be helpful to have some sort of a contact information that is a ABACO information, not calling and going into this quagmire of press this, press that, hold, and you get disconnected.
Right.
When we first met Drexel Boodle after the storm, he was left in tears after seeing the damage done to his home and the community. 5 months later, he said he's leaving the town hall knowing more help is on the way.
We were just wondering, how things are working, like BEC, water, sewage, stuff like that, supplies, question that's affecting the same people but in different areas, Like some people are getting material or getting help, the others are not,
Yeah, it was very worthwhile. I thought, it was quite a confidence builder, I think, for the community to have good representation from government and to answer a lot of questions and, again, create some confidence that there are people working behind the scenes to move the repairs forward.
David Cote said life on the island since Dorian has no doubt been challenging, and residents have had to help themselves as much as they can with the work of nonprofit orgs.
I guess the slogan nowadays is day by day, because you just feel things are not happening. We heard tonight that BPL are going to get a lot of help, and you can see they need it. So we hope that's going to happen, because I've seen large operations, especially when electrical happen. When you get that heavy equipment moving, it can be quite miraculous how fast the power lines come up and people get their power back.
At the end, Managing Director of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, KATHERINE FORBES-SMITH, said it was important for her team to travel to hear the concerns of those left affected by the storm.
You know, the reason for the town hall meetings is to hear from the people. And sometimes it's difficult because people are anxious, people are disappointed, people have expectations. So there's always a difficult side to hosting these town halls, trying to address the questions that people have. But what is most important for us as an authority is to hear from people. Because sometimes you are doing things, you think you're working in the interests of people, you think that, you know, the efforts are being aligned properly with the community's needs, and sometimes you're not. And so it's very important to hear from the people in the community.
From ABACO for Our News, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
All right, thanks a lot, Kyle. Well, the government has received some positive feedback from Grand Bahama's utility companies after criticizing the pace of restoration efforts in December. Georgie O'Bain has the details.
During a contribution in Parliament in December, Deputy Prime Minister and East End MP Peter TURNQUEST was very critical of the pace of service restoration by the Grand Bahama Power Company and the Grand Bahama Port Authority's ability to regulate the utility providers. However, TURNQUEST is now singing a different tune after receiving some positive feedback.
We've received some positive feedback from both utility companies. The electrical company has indicated that they're now going to extend the transmission lines out as far as Equinor in the first stage and work the service back from there towards the Freeport area. That will give electricity to the major settlements in the East End. And then we will look at how we extend the transmission lines out to McLeanstown and Sweetens Key.
The utility company is considering running the lines in the interim or dropping a generator in the community itself in order to provide some temporary power supply in those areas. According to TURNQUEST, the company has indicated it is working on dropping a few more wells in some freshwater reservoirs with hopes of reducing the salinity of the water by June. TURNQUEST said the government is in discussions to reduce fees for customers given the poor water quality since Hurricane Dorian.
We are sensitive and certainly presenting the case of the residents of Grand Bahama to the utility company that they who feel that the charge or the utility company charging for this water that is not potable water may be unfair. And we certainly are having that discussion. The utility company is offering a discount on the water, but nonetheless, the residents do have a position, rightfully so.
TURNQUEST said if residents are unable to cook or drink the water, they should receive a deeper discount than 25%. He added it is his hope that the positive news will help to get people back in those communities.
So that's very positive news and certainly a improvement in the picture that we were faced with before the end of the year. So we do want to thank the power company for acceding to our request in that regard. That will facilitate the redevelopment and the relocation of people back to those communities, which is critically important.
Reporting for Our News Weekend Edition, I'm Georgie O'Bain.
Tourism Minister Dionisio Diagla confirming to Our News that government is in talks with the Grand Bahama Port Authority for the transfer of ownership to the government.
The government would want to see the redevelopment of that airport in much the same way that LPIA was redeveloped, obviously not to that extent, but possibly using the same model and methodology and possibly the same manager.
In a statement this week, Port Authority Acting Chairman Sarah St. George said the rebuilding of the airport remains one of the utmost priorities for the GBPA, adding that they will move forward as expeditiously as possible and always in the best interest of residents. At last report, nearly a dozen employees were laid off at the airport. Diagla says government is moving with haste to hopefully rehire those former employees.
There's an enormous sense of urgency to deal with this matter. It is moving at great pace behind the scenes, and the Bahamian people will be appraised of the outcome of it in a very short time. But rest assured that we are moving with an enormous amount of speed. We are very mindful of the job situation at that airport, and we don't ultimately want to lose that good talent.
The airport was one of many buildings severely damaged by Hurricane Dorian. Diagla said government is creating a plan to implement once it acquires the airport.
We are thinking through that transaction. You have to think through it because the Bahamian people will be unrelenting if you buy it and then just allow it to sit there. So you have to come up with at least a way forward and a plan. It may not all happen all at once because the need is great and the funds are not. So we have to at least map out a plan on how we intend to move forward with not only the reconstruction of the airport, but the management of the airport.
Meantime, leader of the Democratic National Alliance, ARINTHIA KOMOLAFE, criticizing the government's restoration efforts in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. Nearly 5 months after the deadly storm, KOMOLAFE says the government must pick up the pace.
I was very startled by the fact that a few days ago, the minister responsible for this new ministry, Minister Iram Lewis, when asked concerning when the domes would be ready and the dome city would be ready, said, well, we didn't have a timeline. And I found that very interesting because just a matter of months ago, as early as October, it was reported that these domes would be on the ground and that they would be setting up 40 initially, and then every week from there they would be setting up domes to get persons in there. There's nobody in those domes as yet. The city is not up and running.
According to KOMOLAFE, the DNA will visit ABACO, the hardest island hit by the storm, to speak with residents and to lend as much assistance as the party can.
Many of the reports that we're getting is that nothing is moving, or whatever is moving at a very slow pace. And so these are questions that a lot of Bahamians have. We feel that there's not as much progress as there could be and should be on the ground there. And so, but again, it goes to the government asking questions, answering questions, and giving us much more clarity on what's happening. And I think that's why we're taking the initiative ourselves to go on the ground so that we can provide the answers to the people there.
Up next, Fidelity's chief financial officer weighs in on government's travel benefits increase for ministers and their spouses. That story and more coming up.
Phone is good. Internet is good. TV is good. But why just pick one thing when you can have everything with Tria? Only $99 a month gets you phone, internet, and cable. That's everything you need for $99 a month. Ask for Tria. Call 601-2200 or email residentialsales@cablebahamas.com. Rev, you and us together.
Next, tonight, following the firestorm over government's decision to increase travel perks for cabinet ministers and their spouses, Fidelity Bank's chief financial officer, Gowan Bowe, says the conversation should be geared towards government being more transparent with the details of those trips. Berthany McDormick reports.
More importantly, I would expect there to be communications as to what the actual official trips have cost me, which has been promised by previous administrations, has been promised by this administration, and I think that has caused the public, if you will, outcry. Not so much that the details of what the policies are an affront to the general public. I think it's saying, well, are these being used to run up expenses and bills that are exorbitant and we don't see the value from? And I think it's incumbent upon government to say, okay, when I have these trips, I am clear that this is the contingent that went over, and these are the reasons why.
The new travel policy for ministers provides for $100 per day per diem for spouses, an increase in ministerial per diem for domestic travel from $80 to $100 per day, and from $150 to $250 for international travel. Additionally, paid spousal trips have been increased from once to twice per year. Bowe says, in the grand scheme of things, an increase in travel for ministers' spouses from once to twice per year isn't that significant.
It is not being dismissive in terms of saying every dollar doesn't count. But if I'm saying that it allows what I'm going to call the efficiency and effectiveness of cabinet ministers by having the spouse travel twice a year with them, and it also provides an opportunity for what I'm going to call the social benefit in terms of others that may be traveling of a similar vein, then we don't need to nickel and dime.
In January 2018, Prime Minister Dr. Hewitt Minnis said only essential travel would be approved and promised reports of his cabinet ministers' travel. 2 years later, that report still hasn't materialized. Bowe says government needs to differentiate what travel is essential and which trips aren't.
What we have to break it down to is having an appreciation for what is a reasonable contingent that's going over. Meaning that when we look at various meetings, there will be technical components, there will be what I'm going to say administrative components. And so the question is, can a lot of that be done remotely? And if so, then we should be looking certainly at managing our costs. If some of it requires a technical aid or assistant, it requires an administrative assistant, etc., then those are costs that we need to factor in when we are considering which meetings we do attend and which meetings we will forego because we don't see the value add.
Additionally, he said what matters is if the Bahamas wants to be a player in the global arena.
Is it that we want to be listening in from the outside and trying to look at a telephone conversation or a video conference, or do we want our key persons pressed in the flesh? And the reality, I certainly as one would want to be in certain key meetings. I would prefer us to have representation, because what it allows is the fostering of personal relationships with the persons who are sitting across the table. It allows the noticing of facial expressions when certain matters come up. And most importantly, it puts us, or it gives us the appearance of being engaged.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Berthany McDermott.
REV is working to get service fully restored to residents on the island of Abaco. The company's Northern Bahamas director, Dominic says currently 30% of REV's Abaco customers have been restored since Dorian, and crews are hard at work to get everyone reconnected.
We've been in Abaco immediately after the storm. So to date, we have completed the South Abaco, that's south of Spring City, straight down to Sandy Point, and we have completed the north. That's north of Blackwood, straight up to Crown Haven. And so those customers in those areas have our full suite of services.
According to Petty, crews are currently working in Green Turtle Key and Blackwood with a February completion deadline.
We're heavily relying on BPL, so we actually dovetail behind BPL to actually carry out our plan. So we intend to, after that point, we'll actually go into Manowar and Hopetown, and so hopefully we should have a completion date by sometime in March, mid-March, the end of March.
And from the crime beat tonight, a man was injured after a gunman reportedly opened fire on a home. Police say it was shortly before 12 this morning when an unknown person entered a yard on Turk's Court in Flamingo Gardens and began shooting. A man who was inside the house received a graze wound to the stomach. We're told no one else was injured in the incident. Police are appealing to anyone with information that can assist in identifying or locating the person responsible to come forward. When Our News, the weekend edition, comes back from the break, a Bahamian actor shares his journey on the road to Broadway. So stay with us.
Phone is good. Internet is good. TV is good. But why just pick one thing when you can have everything with Tria? Only $99 a month gets you phone, internet, and cable. That's everything you need for $99 a month. Ask for Trio. Call 601-2200 or email residentialsales@cablebahamas.com. Rev, you and us together.
Welcome back to Our News, the weekend edition. Bahamian actor Jonathan Farrington is playing a lead role in a production that has huge significance for the African American community. Jerome Sawyer reports.
The moment Jonathan Farrington walks on stage, he commands the audience. The Bahamian singer-turned-actor received critical acclaim for his great voice here, but these days he's wooing New York audiences in turning 15 on the road to freedom. My story of the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March. Farrington plays multiple roles as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jimmy Webb, a young leader, and Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose murder by a white police officer galvanized a movement.
I was able to kind of like find my way in and realize that this play has nothing to do with nationality. It's more so to do with human rights for all people.
Farrington left home for the draw of the Broadway lights and to complete his education. With some formal training, he's landed a number of roles, just recently as Joseph Assegai in A Raisin in the Sun. But he was destined, it seemed, for this role.
In the summer, I saw this role, I'd signed up and they called me in, and I came in and I performed a monologue. And at the end of my monologue, they were all speechless, and I thought I'd done something wrong, but I actually did something right. They were very moved by the performance, and they called me back maybe 2 weeks later and said, we want to offer you this role.
On the auditioning panel was Ali Sheedy, who's responsible for the book-to-stage adaptation. Sheedy herself, an 80s megastar of War Games, The Breakfast Club, and St. Elmo's Fire.
When he walked into the audition, I was just sitting there and feeling him, and then he sang, and as soon as he walked out of the room, I turned to the director and I said, I beg you on my knees, please put this man into the show.
He shares the spotlight with Kiade Nora, who's had roles in Dreamgirls, Phantom of the Opera, and Hairspray.
He can bounce from a ballad or an up-tempo and really allow his authentic feelings to be shared with the audience and as well as us. It's actually so fun because you don't get a voice like that very often.
From this church and these performances, Jonathan, the cast and crew will head along to a tour along the eastern United States, moving across the states like Ohio eventually, and then wrapping up a nationwide tour within a year. Pretty good exposure for any up-and-coming actor. Reporting from the Riverside Church in New York, I'm Jerome Sawyer, reporting for Our News.
Teaching students all they need to know about sex crimes. That's coming up when Our News, the Weekend Edition, returns.
Phone is good. Internet is good. TV is good. But why just pick one thing when you can have everything with Tria? Only $99 a month gets you phone, internet, and cable. That's everything you need for $99 a month. Ask for Tria. Call 601-2200 or email residentialsales@cablebahamas.com. Rev, you and us together.
Within 20 minutes of the end of the Junior Junkanoo Parade on Thursday, the official winners were announced. A Family Island school took top honors once again in the annual parade.
This is something that brings us together, that unites us, and for us it's heritage. This is something that has started many, many years ago, and so coming together and for the children sharing this knowledge and for us sharing this knowledge with them, it's very important so that they understand who they are, where they came from, and they are confident in where they are going.
The 32nd annual Junior Junkanoo Parade drew large crowds again this year as kids competed in the preschool, primary, junior, and senior divisions. There was no shortage of talent in music, costuming, and choreography in the quest for the top prize. But it was Preston H. Albury High that took the top spot in the senior high school division.
It took many long and hard hours and plenty nights to get the costumes finished, but we did it. It was hard, staying back late, making sure everything was done, but we got it done. That's most important.
There was little doubt that this Eleuthera team came with one goal in mind.
We are the best. We came to win, and we surely did put on a show. We worked hard. We slayed. Let me tell you all your high schools out there, Preston H. Albury, we slay all. Don't lie. We come to win.
So confident are these kids that they have what it takes. This is how they responded to questions about competing in the senior parade.
Yes, 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 yes.
Awesome. The Over the Hill Initiative held a workshop for students at police headquarters recently to educate the youth on the importance of saying no to sexual abuse and being able to identify sex crimes.
I need y'all to shout out no dead loud for me. Okay, wait, I count it down. 3, 2, 1. No! 3, 2, 1. No! 3, 2, 1.
No! Parliamentary Secretary Michael Foulkes told students that the Ministry of Social Services is working hard to reduce the number of sex crimes.
For the year 2018, a total of 627 cases of child abuse were reported to authorities. This reflected an increase of about 10% in reported child abuse cases when we look at 2017. Of the 627, cases of child abuse, 213 of the cases, or 40% of all reported child abuse, was classified as sexual abuse.
According to FOULKES, another initiative is being developed to provide a safe space for students in schools to report cases of sexual abuse and much more.
As you return to your schools, I am advised that you will be supported by an intervention launched in the schools to provide greater support to you. This intervention, bringing together local nonprofits, Department of Education, Department of Social Services, and the Office of the Prime Minister, will support and guide you in helping your peers with not only addressing sexually based crime in the community, but also drugs, gangs, and other social problems.
Well, that's a look at stories making news this evening, but stay tuned. Our weekend weather forecast is coming right up.